Andrew Smith was never the type of man you'd expect to abandon his wife, especially not on the very day she was giving birth to his child. He had always been the charming, dependable one, the man every neighbor in Glendale admired. But hidden beneath the surface was a secret that would upend more than one life. While Jessica labored alone in a sterile hospital room, Andrew was elsewhere, exchanging vows with his mistress. In that moment, he believed he was chasing true happiness. Little did he know that 3 years later, regret would strike harder than he could have ever imagined. Andrew Smith grew up in a tight-knit family on the outskirts of Glendale, California. His parents, Richard and Monique Smith, were known in their neighborhood for their unwavering devotion to one another. They had weathered life's storms, financial troubles, his mother's illness, and the struggles of raising 3 children without ever letting their bond break. Andrew was the middle child, neither the high-achieving eldest like his brother Marcus, nor the gentle artistic youngest like his sister Abigail. But if anyone were to ask, Andrew was the most driven. He had big dreams of becoming an entrepreneur, owning a chain of successful coffee shops, and perhaps settling into a comfortable life surrounded by friends and family. He met Jessica Perez while attending Glendale Community College. Jessica was studying early childhood education, determined to become a teacher. She was the kind of woman who cared deeply, not just for children, but for every person she encountered. Her warmth attracted Andrew from the start, and within weeks they had become inseparable. Jessica's friends teased that she was drawn to Andrew's ambition and quick wit, while Andrew's siblings noted how Jessica's calm demeanor tempered his restless spirit. 2 years into their relationship, they got married in a small ceremony at Jessica's grandparents' ranch in Santa Clarita. Their union was the picture of young love, pure optimistic, and buoyed by big plans for the future. Andrew had just opened his first coffee shop, Glendale Grounds, a modest storefront, but bustling with potential. Jessica found a job at a local preschool, shaping young minds by day and supporting Andrew's dreams at night. For the first few years, they were blissfully unaware of the cracks forming beneath the surface. Andrew's relentless drive led him to expand Glendale Grounds. Soon he had 2, then 3 locations. He was often away working long hours, traveling to find new coffee suppliers or attending seminars. Jessica's teaching schedule was also rigorous, but she always made time for date nights and quiet moments, trying to keep the flame alive. Yet with each new coffee shop, Andrew drifted further. He started missing dinner more frequently. Jessica felt his absence acutely, but she never truly believed it could be anything more than the stress of a growing business. Little did either of them know a single chance meeting in his flagship store would begin to unravel their once happy union. Cynthia Mills was a freelance marketing consultant and an undeniable force of nature. She had moved to Glendale just months prior, attracted by the city's blossoming business scene. Cynthia was known for her polished presentations, cunning strategies, and a confidence that was utterly magnetic. If Cynthia wanted something, she typically found a way to get it. The day Andrew and Cynthia met was unremarkable at first glance. Cynthia strolled into Glendale Grounds' flagship location with a laptop under her arm. She ordered a double espresso and settled into a corner table, preparing to work on a proposal for another client. Andrew happened to be there going through paperwork, observing baristas, and chatting with regulars. Cynthia was exactly the type of clientele he'd hoped to attract, business-minded, sophisticated, and obviously discerning in her taste. She caught his eye, not merely because she was strikingly beautiful, though she was, but because she exuded the kind of sharp energy Andrew believed could propel his business to greater heights. He introduced himself, offered to refill her espresso on the house, and struck up a conversation. Before he knew it, they were discussing potential brand partnerships, ways to streamline social media campaigns, and expansions into other neighborhoods. Cynthia's proposals were fresh and innovative, precisely what Andrew needed to stay ahead of the competition. Impressed by her ideas, Andrew set up a formal meeting the following week to discuss a possible collaboration. One meeting turned into several. Cynthia spent long hours at the cafe, often working alongside Andrew in the back office. She noticed his every gesture, the way he fiddled with his pen when concentrating, the soft smile he wore when discussing his passion for coffee, the charismatic flair he brought to every interaction. Gradually, her professional admiration shifted into something more personal, and Andrew, who had long been starved for excitement outside of routine business tasks, found himself drawn to Cynthia's brilliance and boldness. Jessica was vaguely aware of a new consultant in Andrew's life. He mentioned her sporadically. Cynthia had a great idea today, or Cynthia thinks we should rebrand the logo. Jessica, trusting and supportive, never suspected anything. She remained confident in her husband's loyalty and saw Cynthia purely as a boon to Andrew's business. But with each late-night strategy session and business trip, the lines between professional collaboration and personal intrigue blurred. Andrew was at the precipice, unaware that one misstep could send him careening into an affair that would shatter the world he and Jessica had built. Things took a sharp turn on a trip to San Francisco, where Andrew and Cynthia attended a coffee and marketing convention. Jessica couldn't accompany him. Her teaching responsibilities were demanding, and she was in the early stages of pregnancy. Delighted by the news of becoming a father, Andrew was initially conflicted about traveling at such a crucial time, but Jessica encouraged him to go and grow his business. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime event," she said, stroking her belly. "You have to do what you can to make Glendale Grounds a success." In San Francisco, Andrew and Cynthia's professional rapport escalated into something undeniably personal. After a long day of presentations and networking, they found themselves at the hotel bar savoring a glass of wine. Talk of marketing and coffee beans gave way to deeper conversations about fears, ambitions, and regrets. Cynthia confided that she'd been in a string of unfulfilling relationships and was tired of men who lacked vision. Andrew admitted he often felt lonely, despite being surrounded by employees and customers. He talked about Jessica's pregnancy with pride, but also confessed to feeling anxious about the looming responsibilities. One glass of wine led to another, and the tension between them crackled like static in the air. When Andrew escorted Cynthia back to her hotel room, he lingered at the door a moment too long. That was all the invitation Cynthia needed. A fleeting moment of weakness culminated in a passionate night that neither could deny nor undo. The following morning, Andrew was overcome by guilt and panic. Cynthia attempted to reassure him that they could keep their affair discreet. But Andrew found himself trapped between two worlds, the loyal husband about to become a father, and the ambitious entrepreneur enthralled by a woman who sparked excitement in his otherwise predictable routine. He convinced himself that this was a one-time lapse in judgment, a mistake he would bury deep. When he returned to Glendale, Andrew promised himself to break things off with Cynthia and refocus on Jessica and the upcoming baby. Yet, as any forbidden romance tends to do, the allure only grew stronger. Back home, Cynthia continued working closely with Andrew, and the emotional tie they had forged wouldn't simply disappear. Jessica, meanwhile, began experiencing complications in her pregnancy, further occupying her mind and time. Andrew found himself torn in two, helplessly wanting to be a devoted husband, but too addicted to the fire of his illicit connection with Cynthia. Jessica's pregnancy was marked by both excitement and worry. At her 20-week ultrasound, the doctor detected some minor complications. Though not life-threatening, she was advised to reduce stress rest often and attend frequent checkups. Jessica did her best to follow these instructions, though it meant cutting back on her teaching responsibilities. Her colleagues at the preschool were understanding, sending her well wishes and covering her classes. Andrew appeared supportive, at first driving her to the hospital for appointments, making sure she took her vitamins, and promising to make time for her, despite his hectic schedule. But unbeknownst to Jessica, Andrew's emotional investment had veered dangerously off course. He was juggling phone calls from Cynthia, who pitched new ideas and invited him to after-hours networking events. On the outside, Andrew maintained a facade, a husband still engaged in his wife's well-being, a businessman forging ahead. On the inside, he was spiraling. Late one night, Jessica noticed Andrew texting surreptitiously. She confronted him, albeit gently worried that he might be overworking. He brushed it off, claiming that a supplier had changed terms at the last minute, forcing him into crisis mode. Jessica chose to believe him. After all, Andrew had never before given her a reason to doubt him. She wanted to cling to the image of the devoted man she married. However, Jessica wasn't entirely oblivious. She sensed Andrew's distance, the way he seemed perpetually lost in thought. She tried to bridge the gap by planning a romantic dinner at home, decorating the living room with fairy lights, and cooking his favorite meal, creamy mushroom pasta. Andrew appreciated the gesture, but the intimacy felt strained. Where once they would have fallen into comfortable conversation, now silences hung heavy. Jessica chalked it up to business stress and her own pregnancy-related mood swings, hoping time would realign them. Cynthia, for her part, was not inclined to stay in the shadows. Initially, she told Andrew she was content with secrecy, but as her feelings deepened, so did her aspirations. She wanted Andrew fully not in stolen moments. She started leaving voice messages, hinting at a life they could share. She began dropping by Glendale grounds, unannounced, claiming business emergencies. Slowly, she planted herself in Andrew's world, making it impossible for him to avoid her or hide her presence from prying eyes. With each day, the weight of Andrew's deception grew heavier, even as Jessica's due date grew closer. The delicate balance he thought he could maintain was teetering dangerously, one misstep away from collapsing and crushing everything in its path. As Jessica entered her final trimester, her health became increasingly fragile. Doctors' visits became weekly routines. She was ordered to spend more time on bed rest, limiting her mobility. During this period, Andrew tried to be more present, yet every moment of solace Jessica found in Andrew's support was counterbalanced by the haunting sense that his mind was elsewhere. In the midst of this tension, Glendale Grounds was about to open its fourth branch, a massive milestone for Andrew's business. Local media, including the Glendale Register, planned to cover the grand opening, raising the cafe's profile in the community. Jessica wanted to celebrate Andrew's success. She urged him to invite friends, family, and staff to a soft launch party. Despite her limited mobility, she coordinated with Andrew's sister Abigail to decorate the new location. She even crafted handwritten invitations for the staff, praising their hard work. Cynthia was of course involved in every aspect of the marketing campaign for the new branch. Jessica and Cynthia finally met briefly at the soft launch. Cynthia appeared graceful, poised, and every bit the professional marketing consultant. Jessica thanked her for all the contributions she'd made to Andrew's venture. Cynthia smiled politely, exchanging pleasantries, but internally seethed with envy at Jessica's rightful place beside Andrew. Meanwhile, Andrew, feeling trapped between the two women, found it difficult to hide his anxiety. Complicating matters further, Andrew's parents, Richard and Monique, stopped by the new cafe. Richard pulled Andrew aside, noticing his son's strained expression. "You all right, son?" he asked, genuine concern in his eyes. Andrew forced a smile, insisting everything was fine. Monique fussed over Jessica, offering to help with the pregnancy in any way she could. Andrew felt pangs of shame. He remembered how his parents had stood by each other, through thick and thin, their unwavering devotion, a beacon for him growing up. Here he was, their son, betraying that same devotion with each secret text message and clandestine encounter. The soft launch, while a public success, only amplified Andrew's private turmoil. Cynthia cornered him after the event, pressing him about their future. Jessica, though physically weary, radiated pride in her husband's achievement. Andrew once believed that forging a double life might give him the best of both worlds. Unfortunately, it had only opened a chasm in his soul. The pressure was mounting. Jessica was due any day now, and Andrew felt caught in a riptide of deceit. He failed to realize just how viciously it would tear him from the shore when the time came. Jessica's labor came earlier than expected, 3 weeks before her due date. She had been reclining on the sofa reading a parenting magazine when a sharp pain seized her. Alarmed, she called Andrew, who was at the new cafe with Cynthia, for a staff meeting. He answered, but was distracted, telling Jessica he'd be there soon. Cynthia overheard the conversation, her eyebrows arching, as she realized Jessica was in labor. Jessica's contractions intensified rapidly. She called her sister-in-law Abigail, who rushed over to help her to the hospital. The on-call physician, Dr. Clara Alvarez, examined Jessica and confirmed the baby was on its way, though she also warned that Jessica's blood pressure was dangerously high. Jessica was in tears, partly from the pain, but mostly from the fear that Andrew hadn't arrived yet. Abigail tried to calm her, promising that Andrew would be there any minute. Across town, Andrew felt the intensity of Cynthia's gaze. She watched him with an almost predatory interest as he hung up the phone. Instead of rushing to Jessica, he hesitated, caught in a bizarre swirl of emotions. Cynthia seized the moment to convince him that maybe their love was meant to be that Jessica's pregnancy had never truly kept him by her side. Andrew was vulnerable, exhausted by the months of lies, and he found himself listening to Cynthia's every word. What Andrew did next was unimaginable. Instead of driving to the hospital, he accompanied Cynthia to a courthouse in Van Nuys. Cynthia had orchestrated it perfectly, claiming they needed to make their relationship official if Andrew truly wanted to break free from the charade of his failing marriage. It was a reckless act spurred by emotions and illusions. Andrew, guilt-ridden, yet seduced by the idea of a fresh start, succumbed to Cynthia's plan. In a haze, he signed the necessary paperwork, exchanging vows in a rushed civil ceremony, while Jessica was enduring labor pains. At Glendale Memorial Hospital, Jessica was wheeled into the delivery room. Her blood pressure continued to climb, and the baby's heart rate spiked, alarming the medical team. Monique and Richard arrived, desperately calling Andrew's phone, but he never picked up. Jessica sobbed, asking for her husband, longing for him to hold her hand. Abigail insisted that Andrew must be stuck in traffic or dealing with an emergency. Behind the curtains, Dr. Alvarez prepared for a possible C-section if Jessica's condition worsened. Outside, a thunderstorm gathered over Glendale, mirroring the tumult within Jessica's heart. Jessica gave birth to a daughter, Amelia Rose Smith, at 2:45 a.m. The medical team managed to stabilize Jessica's blood pressure, and after a tense few hours, both mother and baby were safe. Yet the momentous joy of welcoming Amelia into the world was marred by Andrew's absence. He was nowhere to be found, and no one had heard from him since earlier that day. While Jessica clung to her newborn, tears slid down her cheeks. The only reassurance she had was Abigail's gentle voice telling her that everything would be all right. Deep down, Jessica felt a sinking dread. Was Andrew hurt, or had he chosen to abandon her at her most vulnerable hour? In reality, Andrew was in a small, nondescript hotel room with Cynthia. The gravity of his decision weighed on him like an anvil, each heartbeat reminding him of the irreversible vow he'd just made. Cynthia, on the other hand, celebrated triumph. She interpreted Andrew's impulsive compliance as proof of his undying affection, ignoring the guilt plainly etched on his face. Morning dawned, and Andrew's phone buzzed incessantly with missed calls and frantic voicemails. When he finally listened, the words "emergency hospital" and "birth" hammered at his heart. Unsteady and nauseous, he told Cynthia he had to see Jessica to make sure she and the baby were all right. Cynthia tried to stall him, insisting that seeing Jessica now would compromise their newly minted marriage certificate. But Andrew couldn't ignore the fact that a tiny human, his daughter, had come into the world without him. By the time Andrew arrived at Glendale Memorial, Jessica was awake and painfully aware of his betrayal. Rumors had spread. Staff whispered about a tearful father missing in action. Jessica's sister, Abigail, confronted Andrew in the hallway, practically hissing, "Where were you?" Jessica nearly lost her life. Andrew mumbled an excuse about legal complications at the cafe, but Abigail wasn't buying it. Even Andrew's parents looked on him with disbelief and disappointment. Andrew entered Jessica's room cautiously. She lay there, pale and exhausted, holding Amelia protectively against her chest. Jessica looked up at him, tears in her eyes, and asked why Andrew had no coherent answer. He simply stood there, overwhelmed by regret, by the tiny bundle in Jessica's arms, by the knowledge that he had just done something that might rip apart everything he once held dear. In that moment, a single thought crystallized in Andrew's mind. The life he had chosen would not be easy to live with. The hospital room was dimly lit, cast in soft yellow light, the scent of antiseptic still lingering in the air. Jessica lay in bed, pale and exhausted, her newborn daughter swaddled gently in her arms. Amelia's tiny chest rose and fell against her mother's heartbeat, oblivious to the chaos that had unfolded outside the womb. Jessica's arms trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from emotional overload. Her lips were chapped, her cheeks tear-streaked. The nurses moved quietly around her, avoiding questions they had no answers to. There was only one question that mattered to Jessica, now the one that clung to every breath. Where was Andrew? He hadn't come. He hadn't even called. And despite her attempts to convince herself that something must have happened, an accident, a family emergency, anything, a cold and terrifying truth began to settle in her bones. He had chosen not to be there. 3 days later, Jessica was discharged, but she didn't go home. Instead, Richard and Monique Andrews' parents insisted she come stay with them. "You shouldn't be alone right now," Monique had said, placing a warm hand on Jessica's shoulder. "Not with a newborn. Not after this." Jessica had nodded, silently grateful, and broken in equal measure. Their house, once filled with laughter, from Sunday brunches and baby name debates, was now wrapped in an awkward, suffocating quiet. Jessica did her best to keep to herself, tending to Amelia's every need with near-obsessive precision, feeding, changing, rocking her to sleep, repeating the cycle. She found solace in the rhythm of motherhood, even if her own heart was in pieces. Each time Amelia looked up at her with wide, curious eyes, Jessica whispered, "You are enough. We are enough." Andrew didn't show his face until nearly a week later. He arrived at the front door of his parents' home, disheveled and gaunt, holding a small bouquet of tulips and an oversized teddy bear. Monique opened the door and said nothing. She simply stepped aside, allowing her son to walk into the lion's den of his own making. Jessica was in the living room, nursing Amelia under a soft blanket. When she saw him, her entire body stiffened. He stood there frozen. "I'm sorry," he said. Jessica didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on Amelia, her jaw clenched so tightly it ached. I know I should have been there. Everything got out of control. Her voice came out like a whisper, sharp and laced with pain. You weren't just not there, Andrew. You were with her. You married her. The silence that followed felt heavier than grief. I didn't plan it, Andrew muttered. It was a mistake. I didn't know what I was doing. Jessica's head snapped up. Her voice rose for the first time in days. You made vows, Andrew. Vows to me. To us. And then you made more vows while I was screaming in a hospital bed, giving birth to your daughter, alone. Andrew's lip trembled. I didn't think no, she snapped. You didn't. You never thought about me. Or her. She stood still, holding Amelia close, and moved past him. The bouquet dropped from Andrew's hand, hitting the floor like a symbol of something wilted long before it ever bloomed. That night, Andrew stayed outside in his car for hours. Inside, Monique and Richard sat in the kitchen, staring into mugs of untouched tea. Richard finally spoke. He's our son. But what he did, it's unforgivable. Monique sighed. And yet that's our granddaughter in there, and she deserves better than silence and shame. Days passed, then weeks. Andrew began visiting more often, not as a partner, but as a fractured man grasping at fatherhood. He held Amelia cautiously, as though afraid she'd sense the weight of his sins. Jessica never left the room. She watched him like a hawk, not out of jealousy or possessiveness, but from a deep-seated need to protect her daughter from any more lies. Eventually, Andrew confessed. He told her about the courthouse, about the rushed vows, about Cynthia's manipulation, but he didn't tell the whole truth. He left out how willingly he'd followed Cynthia to that courthouse, how willingly he had signed that paper. He painted himself as confused, as swept up, as pressured. Jessica saw through it. You weren't confused, she said bitterly. You were selfish. You saw a shiny new life, and you ran toward it. You left me bleeding and scared so you could chase a fantasy. Andrew's shoulders sagged under the weight of her words. You're right. But I want to fix it. You can't fix this, Andrew, she replied coldly. You can't unmake that choice. Then came Cynthia's retaliation. When Andrew began mentioning annulment, Cynthia refused. She threatened legal action. She claimed she was pregnant. She demanded financial support. And she made one thing clear: she would not be erased. Andrew was now legally married to Cynthia and trapped. Jessica, stuck in legal limbo, couldn't even call herself a divorced woman. Technically, she was still married to a man who now belonged, at least on paper, to someone else. The weight of it all became unbearable. Maria urged Jessica to lawyer up. Abigail offered to help with court filings. Even Monique, once silent, told Jessica, "You deserve peace no matter what it takes." And amid all this, Amelia began to smile for the first time. Jessica wept that day, not because of joy, but because she finally realized how much she'd been holding in. Her daughter was growing. Time was moving. And Jessica, she had a choice to make. She could stay tangled in Andrew's chaos, or she could begin building a life where she was no longer collateral damage, but the foundation of something new. A few months later, Jessica resumed a semblance of normalcy for Amelia's sake. She moved out of her in-laws' home and into a small apartment near her old preschool. With the help of her sister-in-law, Abigail, she began piecing together a new life. She returned to part-time, teaching her colleagues, offering a supportive embrace during her darkest hours. Everyone in Glendale had heard the gossip Andrew Smith had married his mistress while his wife was giving birth. The story circulated in hushed tones at church gatherings, local cafes ironically, including Glendale grounds, and at the preschool playground. Andrew found himself at odds with Cynthia more frequently than he could have anticipated. Their marriage, born of secrecy and impulsivity, lacked a foundation of trust or genuine companionship. Cynthia wanted Andrew's undivided attention, but his guilt pulled him toward Amelia. He tried to be present in Amelia's life, scheduling visits, under the watchful eye of Jessica's disapproving family. Every time he held his daughter, an ache stabbed his heart, reminding him of the home and love he had forsaken. This was not the fresh start he'd imagined. It was a tangled web of regret and half-truths. As Jessica adjusted to single motherhood, she found unexpected solace in therapy sessions offered through her school's counseling program. Talking to a professional helped her process her heartbreak, anger, and lingering doubts. She admitted she still loved Andrew, or at least the man he used to be, but she couldn't reconcile that memory with the person he'd become. Could she ever forgive him? That question loomed without a clear answer. One day, Jessica received an unexpected visitor at her apartment, Marcus Andrews' older brother. Known for his no-nonsense demeanor, Marcus delivered a blunt assessment. He believed Andrew had fallen under Cynthia's manipulative spell. Yet he also observed that Andrew was an adult who had knowingly walked into that relationship. Marcus wanted Jessica to be informed about the legal complexities. He offered to help her find a lawyer to clarify custody arrangements and child support. Andrew, he said, could not dodge his parental responsibilities, even if he was entangled in another marriage. Jessica appreciated the gesture, though it pained her that everything now had to be formalized in legal documents. Through all this, Amelia's presence was the one shining light. The baby giggled, learned to roll over, grabbed at Jessica's fingers and cooed with a pure love that transcended adult betrayals. Jessica clung to that innocence, determined to protect her daughter from the storm Andrew had unleashed. As the first year of Amelia's life unfolded, Andrew's internal conflict intensified. He had tried to negotiate an annulment with Cynthia, but she stonewalled him, demanding a large financial settlement. Cynthia had grown more possessive, possibly realizing that the rush of victory from winning Andrew was fleeting if he remained emotionally distant. Desperate, Andrew sought the counsel of a divorce attorney, Joseph Brandt, who laid out the grim possibilities. Since Andrew and Cynthia had legally married, dissolving the union would be costly and complicated. Given that Cynthia was not simply walking away, the matter could drag on for years if contested. Andrew's mind spun at the prospect. Glendale grounds, though profitable, might not withstand a legal war. And then there was Jessica and Amelia. He wanted to be there for them, to provide a comfortable life for his daughter. But each passing day felt like the walls were closing in. Meanwhile, Jessica grew stronger in her independence. She threw herself into teaching with Amelia as her primary motivation. The more she focused on her own life, the clearer it became that Andrew's choices were out of her control. Though she felt pangs of love and sorrow, she knew a future with him now came with heavy baggage named Cynthia. Cynthia, unrelenting, tried to mold Andrew into a trophy husband. She insisted he attend galas, marketing seminars, and social events that she organized. She wanted to showcase her success. Look, I have the most sought-after entrepreneur in Glendale by my side, but Andrew's heart wasn't in it. He would plaster on a polite smile for photographs, while silently yearning to be reading bedtime stories to Amelia or checking on Jessica's well-being. One evening, Andrew decided to slip away from a networking event to drive by Jessica's apartment. As he parked outside, he saw the soft glow of lamplight through the window. Inside, Jessica was cradling Amelia, singing a lullaby. Andrew felt an almost physical pain an overwhelming wave of regret and sorrow. He realized that in chasing a reckless fantasy, he had lost the chance to be a father to his daughter in all those little day-to-day ways that truly mattered. That night, Andrew didn't step out of his car. He just watched quietly, tears threatening to spill. He realized that no matter what legal or financial battles lay ahead, he would need to do something drastic to rectify or at least mitigate the damage he had done. The question was, how much was he willing to sacrifice to make things right? It began with a phone call. Jessica had just returned from the grocery store, balancing a squirming Amelia on one hip and a bag of produce on the other, when her phone rang. The caller ID was unfamiliar, Elena Collins, it read. Jessica hesitated for a beat before answering. Ms. Perez, the voice on the other end, was smooth, almost apologetic. "I'm Elena Collins from the Glendale Register. I'm working on a feature story regarding Andrew Smith, the founder of Glendale Grounds. We've received several anonymous tips that his personal life may have intersected with his business decisions. Would you be open to an interview?" Jessica froze. Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't the first time she'd felt the heat of whispers following her at the preschool or sensed stares at the park playground. But this was different. This was the press. This was exposure. "I'm sorry, I'm not interested," she said, her voice clipped but polite. "Please don't call me again." Jessica hung up and stared at the floor, her heart pounding. Her daughter clung to her, sensing her mother's tension. She kissed Amelia's forehead and whispered, "It's okay, baby. We're okay." But they weren't. The next day, the headline exploded across the internet. "Cafe King's Secret Vows. A Tale of Betrayal and Big Business." Jessica's photo, taken from her old Facebook profile, was plastered beside Andrew's and Cynthia's. The article was filled with speculation, anonymous sources, and just enough truth to make it impossible to ignore. It detailed Andrew's courthouse wedding, on the day Jessica gave birth, the existence of Cynthia in Glendale Grounds operations, and even claimed that Cynthia was now pregnant with Andrew's second child. Jessica sat at her kitchen table, the newspaper trembling in her hands. Her coffee had gone cold. Her heart felt as if it had been ripped from her chest and laid bare for the entire town to dissect. The shame, the humiliation, it all came crashing down. At the preschool, parents gave her sympathetic looks, cloaked in curiosity. At the grocery store, strangers whispered behind aisle displays. Jessica did her best to hold her head high, but inside she was unraveling. She felt stripped of her privacy dignity and the little stability she had built over the last year. Later that week, Maria, her outspoken cousin, burst into Jessica's apartment. "You have to respond," Maria said, throwing the newspaper on the counter. "You can't let her control the narrative. You can't let people think you were the problem." "I don't care what they think," Jessica whispered, staring blankly at the window. "I care about Amelia." Maria's voice softened. "And Amelia will grow up Googling her parents one day. Do you want her to find this and think you were silent because you had something to be ashamed of?" Jessica blinked back tears. "I was in labor. He was marrying someone else. What else is there to say?" Meanwhile, Andrew was spiraling. Glendale Grounds had started to suffer. Once a local darling of artisanal charm and community pride, the cafes were now haunted by the scandal. Long-time customers boycotted the stores. Business partners pulled out of potential collaborations. His inbox was flooded with emails, some cruel, some disappointed, a few supportive but all overwhelming. In private, Andrew seethed, not at Jessica, not even at the media. He seethed at himself for letting it get this far, for trusting Cynthia, for believing that a woman who craved power could ever be satisfied with love. He confronted Cynthia one night, demanding to know if the pregnancy rumors were true. "Are you pregnant or not?" He barked. Cynthia smiled lazily, swirling her wine in a glass. "That's none of your business, darling, unless you plan to take responsibility. Don't play games." She leaned in her voice like poison-laced silk. "You made me a promise, Andrew. You left your wife. You married me. And now you're embarrassed because people know the truth, poor Andrew. The world's seeing who you really are." He stormed out. Desperate to reclaim some control, Andrew messaged Jessica. "Can I come by just to talk, after Amelia's asleep? I need to explain." Jessica stared at the message for a long time before replying, "1 hour. Don't be late." That evening, the atmosphere in her apartment was charged and tense. Amelia was asleep in her crib. The quiet hum of the baby monitor filled the silence between them. Andrew looked worn older, paler, beaten down by headlines and regret. He took off his coat and stood awkwardly near the kitchen counter. "I'm sorry," he began. Jessica folded her arms. "You've said that before." "I know, but this time I mean it without expecting anything in return. I want to tell the truth." He explained everything. The legal mess, Cynthia's manipulation, the pregnancy lie, he still hadn't seen any proof, and his failing business. "I'm trying to get out. I'm trying to fight for custody, for annulment, for everything, but Cynthia's playing a dangerous game." Jessica watched him closely. "And you're not," his shoulders slumped. "I was. But I'm not anymore, I swear. I don't want Cynthia. I don't want that life. I just want to be a father to Amelia. I want to help raise her, to give her stability, and maybe one day to deserve a second chance." Jessica said nothing at first. Then, in a low voice, "You missed your daughter's birth, Andrew. You didn't just break a vow, you broke a moment. And that's something you can never get back, I know," he whispered, "and I live with it every single day." He wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his jacket. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for the chance to prove that I can be more than what I was." Jessica stared at him for a long moment. For her sake, she said, "You'd better be." That night when Andrew left, Jessica didn't feel resolved or healed. But she did feel a shift, something real, however small. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was the beginning of something new, accountability. And for once, Andrew didn't run from it. The following weeks turned into a seesaw of emotions. Jessica allowed Andrew scheduled visits with Amelia, making him promise not to bring Cynthia. Andrew complied, driving over after work to spend a couple of hours with his daughter, reading picture books or simply watching her play. Amelia, unburdened by adult conflicts, giggled and squealed, reaching out her tiny arms for her father. Each visit filled Andrew with a bittersweet mixture of joy and remorse. Meanwhile, Cynthia launched her own campaign. She began appearing unannounced at Glendale grounds, making public scenes whenever Andrew tried to avoid her. On one occasion, she threw a coffee mug against the wall, shattering it, and screamed about Andrew's betrayal. Staff members exchanged looks of alarm. Andrew was forced to ask Cynthia to leave, but she threatened a lawsuit for emotional distress. It was the kind of drama that neither Andrew nor his employees could contain. Word spread further, tarnishing the cafe's reputation. In a desperate attempt at damage control, Andrew considered selling Glendale grounds entirely, or at least transferring ownership to remove himself from the public eye. Yet something in him resisted, letting go of the dream he had poured so much effort into. That dream, after all, had once been shared by Jessica. He wasn't ready to abandon it, not unless there was no other choice. Simultaneously, Jessica faced her own set of dilemmas. She had found a new sense of self after Andrew's betrayal, an independence that, while painful, was also empowering. The question lingered, did she want Andrew back in her life, beyond his role as Amelia's father? Could she love him again? Did she even want to friends? And family weighed in most urging caution. Jessica's cousin Maria told her not to risk her heart again. Abigail, torn by loyalty to both her brother and Jessica, simply said she would support any decision Jessica made. Despite the well-intentioned counsel, Jessica knew the choice was ultimately hers alone. One late evening, after putting Amelia to bed, Jessica scrolled through old photos on her phone, pictures of her and Andrew during their college days, smiling in front of Glendale grounds, first storefront arms wrapped around each other. Tears stung her eyes. It was amazing how quickly a life could change, how swiftly a dream could become a nightmare. Yet a flicker of hope refused to extinguish a persistent memory of the Andrew she used to know thoughtful, determined loving. If that Andrew still existed somewhere beneath the wreckage, perhaps redemption was possible, but only if he was willing to fight for it. Andrew finally took a decisive step. He served Cynthia with divorce papers. The day he handed them to her in the Glendale grounds office, she burst into a violent rage, knocking over a display of coffee bags and hurling a stream of curses his way. Cynthia vowed to destroy Andrew's reputation, to drag him through the courts, and to take every penny he had. Andrew steeled himself, knowing it could get ugly, but he also felt a sense of relief for having chosen a path, no matter how perilous. Cynthia's next move was to go public. She scheduled an interview with Elena Collins, the same journalist from the Glendale Register, to tell her side of the story. In a lengthy exposé, Cynthia painted Andrew as a manipulative cheater who promised her marriage and then threw her aside. She claimed to be pregnant, though she provided no medical proof. She also cast aspersions on Jessica, insinuating that Jessica had driven Andrew into Cynthia's arms by being too controlling and needy. The article spread like wildfire, spurring heated debates in social media groups and local forums. Glendale grounds faced more boycotts, and Andrew's personal phone was inundated with hateful messages. Despite the chaos, Jessica noticed something different about Andrew. He no longer wavered. He attended every court hearing, every mediation, prepared to stand up for himself. He publicly declared Cynthia's allegations false, challenging her to present evidence of her supposed pregnancy. Moreover, he consistently showed up for Amelia, never missing a scheduled visit. The shift was subtle, but undeniable. Andrew was finally taking responsibility for his actions, rather than hiding. At one court hearing, Cynthia arrived with a lawyer, but still no proof of pregnancy. The judge grew impatient, demanding to see medical records. Cynthia tried to stall, claiming she needed more time. Andrew's lawyer seized the opportunity to highlight her lack of credibility. Outside the courtroom, Andrew and Jessica found themselves briefly alone. Andrew thanked Jessica for not attacking him in the press. Jessica responded that she wanted Amelia to grow up respecting both parents if possible. "You made the choices that led us here," she said, eyes brimming with both sadness and a hint of compassion. "But I don't want this to end in endless hatred. It's bad for Amelia." That conversation lingered in Andrew's mind. For the first time since the fiasco began, he felt a tiny measure of hope, not necessarily that Jessica would take him back, but that perhaps they could move forward in a healthier way. Even as Cynthia's fury promised more storms ahead, Andrew stood firm. He realized he might be too late to fix the damage he had done, but for Amelia's sake, and perhaps for Jessica's, he wanted to try. A few more months rolled by, bringing both relief and new challenges. The court compelled Cynthia to submit to a medical examination. The results proved she was not pregnant, confirming Andrew's suspicion that the pregnancy was a fabrication to maintain control. Incensed by being caught in her lie, Cynthia ramped up her intimidation tactics. She threatened to reveal intimate details about her and Andrew's affair, claiming she had photos and messages that would mortify him. Andrew's lawyer countered with a cease and desist letter, warning Cynthia that releasing any private content without consent could open her to legal consequences. The tension simmered, but for the moment, Cynthia's threats remained just that, threats. Meanwhile, Jessica witnessed Andrew's transformation more clearly. He had stepped back from the daily operations of Glendale grounds, delegating responsibilities to a trusted management team so he could focus on his legal battles and personal life. During his visits with Amelia, he was attentive patient and genuinely engaged. He even attended a few of Jessica's therapy sessions to work on co-parenting strategies. Though far from perfect, he was making real efforts to repair what he could. Yet the question still lingered, could they reconcile romantically? Jessica wrestled with that uncertainty. In therapy, she admitted that while she saw positive changes, the betrayal ran deep. She worried about setting a dangerous precedent, that she might inadvertently teach Amelia that it was okay to accept infidelity or abandonment. On the other hand, she recognized that people could change if they truly confronted their wrongdoing. She didn't want to bury her own capacity for forgiveness. Andrew, for his part, didn't push. He asked Jessica if they could go on a walk together with Amelia in her stroller just to talk. Jessica agreed, and they met on a sunny afternoon at Verdugo Park. They strolled beneath leafy trees, making small talk at first about Amelia's feeding habits, her new obsession with a plush teddy bear. Gradually, the conversation turned more serious. Andrew spoke candidly about his regret, his foolishness in thinking Cynthia was the thrill he needed. He confessed that the life he truly wanted was the one he'd thrown away, but he accepted that getting it back might never happen. He just hoped Jessica would see that he was genuinely remorseful. They ended the walk by a small pond where ducks gathered. Amelia squealed at the sight of them, reaching out her chubby arms. Jessica looked at Andrew, who held Amelia's tiny hand, and for a fleeting moment, the scene felt familiar, like an echo of the family they were supposed to be. Jessica felt a twinge of longing. Maybe they could chart a new path. But neither of them spoke that thought aloud, uncertain of how to proceed without reopening old wounds. 3 years had passed since that fateful day Jessica went into labor. 3 years since Andrew made the catastrophic decision to marry his mistress while his pregnant wife lay in a hospital bed. The legal processes dragged on, but at last, a weary judge granted Andrew a divorce from Cynthia, citing fraud as the primary cause. Cynthia vanished from Glendale shortly after leaving behind a trail of rumors and unpaid debts. Glendale grounds, weathering an initial slump, rebounded under a new marketing campaign, and a sympathetic public who found Andrew's renewed humility more palatable than his previous brash ambition. Amelia was now a rambunctious toddler, her curly hair framing a mischievous smile. She bounded around Jessica's small apartment, filling the rooms with laughter. Andrew visited often, sharing meals and reading bedtime stories. He never stayed overnight, respecting Jessica's emotional boundaries, but he was there. And it made all the difference to Amelia, whose face lit up whenever he walked through the door. Andrew and Jessica had been slowly, cautiously inching toward reconciliation. They enrolled in a co-parenting class, which transitioned into a couples counseling program once Jessica felt stable enough to consider rebuilding their relationship. Their counselor, Dr. Samantha Lee, guided them through trust exercises and long, sometimes painful dialogues. Andrew owned his mistakes with sincerity that Jessica had never seen before. Jessica spoke her truth, explaining the deep wounds left by his betrayal. She set firm boundaries about honesty and accountability. Little by little, the walls cracked. On Amelia's 3rd birthday, they threw a small party in Jessica's new rental house, a modest but cozy place with a backyard. Family and close friends gathered, including Andrew's parents, Jessica's cousins, and a handful of their old college friends. Balloons dotted the fence line, and a homemade chocolate cake sat on the picnic table. Jessica stood by the grill flipping hamburgers, while Andrew chased Amelia around the yard, both shrieking with laughter. In a quiet moment, Jessica's cousin Maria approached, gave her a hug, and whispered, "I've never seen you smile like this since before everything happened. You look happy." Jessica realized she was happy at least in that fleeting moment. After the guests left, and the yard was littered with wrapping paper, Andrew helped Jessica put Amelia to bed. They read her a new storybook about a family of bears who lose their way and find each other again. Amelia nodded off, her little fist wrapped around Andrew's finger. Jessica and Andrew stood there, watching their daughter sleep, the moonlight casting a soft glow on Amelia's rosy cheeks. Andrew turned to Jessica, tears brimming in his eyes. "I'm so sorry," he said, voice trembling. "For everything." In that quiet moment, Jessica placed her hand gently on his cheek. She didn't say the words, "I forgive you," because forgiveness was an ongoing journey. But the gesture was enough to let Andrew know that at last there was a path forward. A path that involved acknowledging the past while daring to hope for a better future together. Though 3 years had already passed since the day Andrew married his mistress, the full weight of his regret would linger well beyond that timeline. Each milestone, Amelia's first words, her first steps, her first day of preschool, reminded him of the moments he nearly forfeited. He often lay awake at night, tormented by vivid memories of Jessica in that hospital bed, crying out for him, while he was somewhere else, exchanging vows that meant nothing but heartbreak. However, life in its strange mercy granted him a second chance. Andrew used it to become the father and partner he should have been all along. He poured his energy not just into Glendale grounds, but also into rebuilding the trust he had squandered with Jessica. Slowly, they found their way back to affection. It wasn't like the youthful honeymoon phase they once shared. It was more measured, scarred by pain, but underpinned by a deeper, steadier love forged through hard-earned lessons. Even so, regret was Andrew's daily companion. Some days, it was a dull ache, a reminder of his frailty. On other days, it flared painfully, especially whenever he saw Jessica quietly wipe away tears, triggered by a stray thought of that dark time. But in facing that regret, head-on, in never forgetting it, Andrew found a compass that guided him to be better. Because true redemption, he learned, demands that you remember why you needed it in the first place. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey of betrayal, regret, and the fragile hope for redemption. Andrew's story serves as a stark reminder that the choices we make, especially in moments of weakness, can carry consequences that ripple through many lives. Yet it also shows that with honesty, determination, and a willingness to face the past, it's sometimes possible to rebuild what was broken. Jessica's story proves that strength and compassion can coexist, and that setting boundaries doesn't mean shutting the door to healing.
Millionaire promised the world to his mistress but forgot his pregnant wife's birthday. Meet Alexander Van Doren, a self-made millionaire, so used to getting everything he wants that he's forgotten how much it costs others. His life is a tapestry of luxurious galas, glittering diamonds, and secret rendezvous. But beneath the polished veneer, he's about to discover that a man who can buy the world might lose what truly matters most. Driven by obsession, he dares to promise the world to his radiant mistress, all while ignoring the quiet heartbreak of his pregnant wife. When a forgotten birthday sets off a chain of cataclysmic events, Alexander's world careens toward disaster. Secrets will unravel, loyalties will shatter, and no amount of money can save him now. Alexander Van Doren was, by all appearances, the perfect portrait of success. He was lean, tall, and strikingly handsome, with sharp blue eyes that seemed to pierce through whoever stood before him. His family name carried weight, but his true fortune was self-made, a sprawling real estate empire built upon a single risky investment he'd made at just 24 years old. By 30, he had multiplied that fortune 100-fold. Now, at 36, he was poised to double it yet again. He lived in the affluent enclave of Westbridge Hills, where gated mansions lined the streets like jewels in a crown. Neighbors spoke his name in hushed tones, a mix of envy and admiration. He had everything he wanted, or so it seemed. The truth was, in the silent corners of his life, dissatisfaction brewed like a storm. Alexander craved excitement, an addiction to adrenaline, and the thrill of conquering every obstacle. His wife, Catherine Van Doren, was the epitome of dignity and grace. Once an aspiring poet, she had traded her ambitions for the life of a corporate wife, attending charity events and nodding dutifully by her husband's side. Despite her own silent yearnings, Catherine held steadfastly to love and loyalty. She was 9 months pregnant with their first child, her belly a gentle curve that symbolized a long, cherished dream, but the glow that once marked her features had dimmed in recent months, replaced by worry lines carved from loneliness and suspicion. The tension in the mansion was palpable. Lately, Alexander had seemed preoccupied, spending many nights in his study or at business meetings. Catherine had begun to wonder, had she done something wrong? Was the pregnancy too much for him? Or perhaps there was someone else occupying that space in his heart. She tried to dismiss the thought, but women's intuition rarely lies dormant for long. Then came an innocent hint of reality that Catherine couldn't ignore. One night, while searching for her car keys, she found a receipt for an extremely expensive bracelet in Alexander's jacket pocket. Engraved on it was a message that read, "For my shining star, A.V." Now, Catherine's name had no V in it, and though the initials matched her husband, the note looked suspiciously intimate. Panic churned inside her, but she told herself it could be for business, perhaps a thank you gift for an investor or something along those lines. Yet the seed of doubt took root. In the days that followed, Catherine became more observant. She noticed Alexander's phone lighting up late at night with texts from someone named AP. She noticed the hush in his voice whenever he answered these calls. She felt the distance, colder than any winter frost, growing between them. But still, she tried to hope, to believe that once the baby arrived, everything would fall back into place. Little did she know, that delicate facade of normalcy was on the brink of shattering, sending the Van Doren household into turmoil from which it might never recover. Anastasia Pierce was Alexander's secret, a secret that roared like a wildfire beneath the surface of his otherwise controlled existence. She was a striking woman with raven hair and emerald-green eyes that seemed to sparkle with mischievous curiosity. In many ways, she was the polar opposite of Catherine, yet she carried a certain allure that Alexander found irresistible. They'd met 6 months ago at a fundraising gala for the Westbridge Hills Arts Council, a place Alexander had attended more out of obligation than genuine interest. Yet upon spotting Anastasia across the room, her laughter echoing, her slender figure accentuated by a simple but elegant black dress, he'd felt a spark he could not ignore. Their first encounter was innocent enough. She'd merely introduced herself, praising his charitable contributions to local youth art programs. One drink led to another, and conversation flowed like a well-aged wine. Soon they were meeting under hushed arrangements at an upscale lounge downtown, away from the prying eyes of Westbridge Hills. They told themselves it was just a harmless flirtation, but lines blurred quickly. Anastasia was no naive college girl enamored by wealth. She was a sophisticated woman who had carved a path in the art world, curating exhibitions and traveling extensively. She was used to attention and men with money. Yet something about Alexander tugged at her heartstrings more intensely than she'd anticipated. Perhaps it was the subtle vulnerability lurking behind his confident exterior, or maybe it was his magnetic aura of possibility. He made lavish promises, whispered in her ear about a future filled with travel, romance, and a place of her own in his heart. She believed, or at least wanted to believe, that these promises were real. But as the months unfolded, Anastasia found herself catching glimpses of Alexander's deeper complexities, his restlessness, his unspoken burdens, and the ring that still glinted on his left hand whenever he forgot to take it off in her presence. She often wondered about Catherine, but Alexander's dismissals were always the same. It's complicated. She doesn't understand me like you do, or we're practically living separate lives now. He insisted a divorce was on the horizon, painting an image of a marriage that was more a business arrangement than a union of hearts. Stolen weekends in Montauk, secret lunches in hidden bistros, midnight phone calls brimming with passion. It was easy for Anastasia to lose herself in the fantasy. She craved the adrenaline too, thriving on the illicit thrill, but deep down, she yearned for stability. She wanted to be more than just a hidden mistress. She believed Alexander when he promised that soon it would just be the two of them. Now, with Catherine's pregnancy nearing its final weeks, the pressure mounted. Alexander was starting to show signs of agitation. He was jumpy, glancing at his phone every few minutes, always on alert. Anastasia felt the simmer of urgency in their conversations, as if a storm was about to break, yet she held fast to the illusions he'd spun around her. After all, he was Alexander Van Doren, the brilliant millionaire who had never failed in any venture. If anyone could make impossible dreams come true, it had to be him. What she didn't know was that behind the bravado, Alexander was dancing on thin ice, and every step threatened to plunge them all into the freezing darkness beneath. Back at the Van Doren mansion, the tension thickened with every passing day. Catherine's due date edged closer, and with it came a surge of emotional fragility. She found herself fending off swirling anxieties about motherhood, about her marriage, and about the unspeakable secret she feared might be unfolding before her very eyes. She tried to confront Alexander at dinner one night, choosing her words carefully, desperate for reassurance. "Alex," she began softly, tracing the rim of her glass of water, "I feel like we're drifting. Is something on your mind?" He looked up from his phone, seemingly startled. "What makes you say that?" "I've just been busy at work. You know how it is," he replied, offering the faintest of smiles. His eyes, however, revealed no warmth. Catherine pressed on, uncertain if she should mention the bracelet receipt or the mysterious late-night texts. But she stopped short, her heart hammered, fearing that speaking the words aloud would make them irrevocably real. She settled instead for a whispered question. "Don't you think we should spend more time together before the baby arrives? Maybe a short trip, just us?" Alexander grimaced slightly. The very thought of stepping away from his swirling entanglements, business deals, his affair, seemed like a burden. "We'll have time," he said tersely, returning his attention to his phone as if the conversation had already ended. That night, Catherine wept silently in bed while Alexander dozed off in his office, lulled by spreadsheets and clandestine messages from Anastasia. The future that once promised warmth and familial bliss was turning cold. If only Catherine had known how complicated things were behind the scenes. Days later, an ominous cloud settled over Westbridge Hills, literally and figuratively. A slow-moving storm churned in the Atlantic, threatening to drench the coastline in torrential rain. The local news couldn't stop warning about flash floods and hurricane-force winds. Yet the warnings did little to shift the course of the emotional storm taking shape within the Van Doren circle. For while Catherine was preparing for a baby, Anastasia was preparing to claim what she believed was rightfully hers. She'd grown restless with Alexander's excuses. Why did he refuse to make their relationship public? Why did he keep delaying the big talk about leaving Catherine? The frustration swelled into resentment, and resentment gave birth to bold decisions. Late one evening, she texted Alexander, "Anastasia, we need to talk, face to face. I want answers." But answers were not something Alexander was prepared to give just yet. His business deals were teetering on critical negotiations. A lucrative land development near Charleston was about to net him tens of millions. He needed to maintain focus, to keep his composure. He responded curtly, "Alexander, soon, my star, I promise. Just need to wrap up a few things." Anastasia read the message and felt a swirl of conflicting emotions: hope, anger, longing. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being strung along. Perhaps it was time to make Alexander see that she wasn't a mere accessory. Maybe she should make a bold appearance at the Van Doren mansion or confront him at his office. But would that risk losing him entirely? Fear and determination wrestled in her mind. Meanwhile, Catherine found herself alone in the mansion more often. She tried to distract herself by tidying the nursery, a serene space painted in soft green, with a crib made from the finest wood. But emptiness lingered in every corner of that grand house. She quietly decided that if Alexander wouldn't share his burdens with her, she'd uncover the truth on her own. Little did any of them realize that the approaching literal storm was merely a harbinger of the chaos and heartbreak that awaited. Catherine's birthday arrived on a day marked by incessant rainfall. Wind whipped the trees in the Van Doren estate's expansive garden, scattering leaves across the marble driveway. The storm had intensified overnight, and the weather mirrored Catherine's inner turmoil. She'd never been one to demand grand gestures or expensive gifts. A simple, heartfelt acknowledgement would have sufficed. In years past, Alexander would lavish her with roses, jewelry, or romantic dinners in five-star restaurants. They would dance, laugh, and talk about their shared dreams. Yet this year, as the sun struggled to break through the storm clouds, there was no sign of Alexander. Not even a text message. Catherine rose early, heart fluttering with a faint optimism. Perhaps he planned a surprise? She had to allow him that benefit of the doubt. She showered, dressed in a loose, comfortable sweater that stretched over her pregnant belly, and tiptoed downstairs. The house was silent, echoing her hopes back to her in empty hushes. By mid-morning, her phone remained quiet. No calls, no texts, just the relentless pounding of the rain on the windows. She sipped tea alone in the spacious living room, trying not to let her tears overflow. The day dragged on, each hour a cruel reminder that the man she loved was too lost in his own world to remember something as simple as her birthday. And where was Alexander? He was in an upscale penthouse suite downtown, far from the prying eyes of Westbridge Hills. A last-minute business conference call had turned into a celebratory lunch with potential investors. And that lunch turned into an impromptu dinner. Throughout it all, he was accompanied by Anastasia. She'd demanded a face-to-face meeting to discuss their future, and Alexander, hoping to placate her, invited her to the city under the guise of business. In the plush intimacy of that penthouse, they shared whispered confidences and sipped champagne. Anastasia prodded him about the timeline for his divorce, pressing harder than she ever had before. Her green eyes burned with resolve. "You keep saying you'll leave Catherine. You said you'd do it before the baby arrived, so we could start our life. But time's running out, Alexander." He swallowed hard, scanning the room as if searching for an exit. "Things are complicated, Anna. "You know that," he said, employing the gentle tone he used whenever he tried to calm her. "Once this business deal closes, I'll make the final move, I promise." Thunder rumbled in the distance, lightning splitting the sky. A flicker of guilt surfaced in Alexander's eyes, but he quickly suppressed it. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, but he ignored it. He was too ensnared by Anastasia's allure, too intoxicated by the escape she provided. He never once glanced at the date or realized its importance. Even as night fell, Catherine's phone remained silent of any birthday wishes from her husband. Alone in a darkened living room, the storm raging outside her windows, she made a promise to herself after the baby was born. She would confront Alexander directly. No more doubts or uncertainties. She wanted the truth, whether it shattered her heart or not. For Alexander, this single oversight for getting his pregnant wife's birthday would prove to be the first domino in a cascade of devastating consequences. The morning after Catherine's forgotten birthday, the storm had finally abated, but the atmosphere within the Van Doren mansion remained suffused with tension. Catherine woke up feeling numb. She hadn't slept well. Every time she closed her eyes, memories of happier birthdays flooded her consciousness. She remembered how Alexander once surprised her with a hot air balloon ride, how he serenaded her on a whim. Now, that seemed like another lifetime. She mustered the courage to confront him, but found the master bedroom empty. In his usual spot on the nightstand, Alexander's phone was missing. So was he. Instead, she found a terse note, "Had an early meeting. Don't wait up." The words stung like a slap to the face. Her birthday gone unacknowledged. She wondered if he even remembered now. By noon, Catherine decided she could no longer ignore her suspicions. She needed proof, solid evidence of Alexander's infidelity. Gathering her resolve, she went to his home office. It was a spacious room, lined with dark wooden shelves and encyclopedias of business strategies, with a large mahogany desk dominating the center. In that desk was a locked drawer. She'd seen him open a few times, always discreetly. Her heart pounded as she rifled through his keys until she found the small one that fit. The drawer clicked open to reveal a stack of documents. Nestled among them was a small black journal with handwritten notes and receipts tucked into the pages. She flipped through quickly, eyes widening at what she saw, travel itineraries to luxury hotels. She had never stayed in with him. Designer shopping receipts for items far too intimate to be for business associates. And pictures. Selfies he'd taken with Anastasia in fancy restaurants, at art exhibits, and once on a yacht, each one capturing their secret world. Catherine's breath caught in her throat as she studied the woman in the photos. Anastasia was stunning everything. Catherine had once been, perhaps. But it wasn't just jealousy that roiled in Catherine's gut. It was betrayal, heartbreak, and a fierce determination. She now had confirmation of her husband's double life. Tears filled her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. Footsteps in the hallway jolted her, and she hastily shoved everything back into the drawer, locking it. She could barely compose herself when Alexander walked in, a troubled expression on his face. "Kath, what are you doing in here?" he asked, noticing her tremor. She closed her eyes, took a shaky breath, and turned to face him. For a moment, neither spoke. Catherine was torn between accusing him outright and preserving the little dignity she had left. In the end, she said, "We need to talk," her voice steadied by an undercurrent of rage and heartbreak. Alexander looked uneasy. "Yes, we do, but maybe later. I have important calls." "Important calls?" she echoed, her voice edged with anger. "What about my birthday, Alexander? Or does that not matter anymore?" He seemed genuinely startled, a flash of realization crossing his face. "Catherine, I'm sorry. It slipped my mind with all the chaos at work. She held up a hand, cutting him off. Just don't. We'll talk tonight," she said, her voice quivering with hurt, but also steeled by knowledge. With that, she brushed past him, leaving Alexander to grapple with the first stirrings of real guilt. What neither of them could predict was just how explosive that evening's conversation would be and how its repercussions would extend far beyond the walls of their mansion. Night descended on Westbridge Hills with a certain heaviness, as if the air itself braced for an impending confrontation. Catherine spent the day locked in a mental tug-of-war. Her heart wept for the marriage she once had, yet her mind screamed for answers, resolution, no matter how painful it might be. By the time Alexander returned home, she was waiting in the living room, perched on the edge of the couch like a sentinel. The room was awash in the dim glow of a single lamp, casting dramatic shadows on the walls. Catherine's expression was resolute, her posture poised. "We talk now," she said firmly the moment he stepped inside. Alexander set down his briefcase and loosened his tie, looking as though he'd rather be anywhere else. But there was no escaping. Not this time. Catherine wasted no time. She retrieved the stack of incriminating documents and photographs from the desk drawer, laying them out on the coffee table like evidence in a courtroom. "Do you want to explain these?" she asked, her voice heartbreakingly calm. Alexander froze, color draining from his face. He glanced at the images of him and Anastasia, the receipts, the notes scrawled in the little black journal. Lies dangled on the tip of his tongue, but he could no longer pretend. "Catherine, who is she?" Catherine's voice cracked, just enough to reveal her underlying pain. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room. "Her name is Anastasia Pierce. We met some months ago." It was never supposed to go this far. Catherine's eyes glistened with tears she fought to hold back. "But it did. And you chose her over your own wife, your pregnant wife. Why, Alexander?" She waited, but no meaningful excuse came. "Have you even considered the stress you're putting on me, on our child?" Alexander pinched the bridge of his nose, shame mingling with frustration. "Catherine, I'm sorry. My life. It felt like it was missing something. I couldn't control it. Everything just spiraled. Missing something," Catherine repeated, her voice choked with emotion. "We built a life together, and I'm carrying your child. And you say you're missing something?" He had no answer that would satisfy her. The room reverberated with silence until Catherine finally spoke again. "You need to decide, Alexander. I'm not going to share you with anyone. If you want this marriage, if you want to be a father, you have to cut her out of your life. Completely." Alexander stared at the floor, weighed down by 1,000 unspoken fears. He thought of Anastasia's piercing green eyes, her effervescent laughter, the sense of forbidden freedom she awakened in him. But he also thought of Catherine's steady heart, her unwavering love, and the unborn child he had a duty to protect. The decision was monstrous, yet also straightforward. Family or mistress? "I need time," he whispered finally, afraid to look Catherine in the eye. "You have until tomorrow," she said, not unkindly. "Otherwise, I'll do what I have to do for myself and for this baby." Alexander nodded, the gravity of her words crashing over him. He turned away, unable to face the devastation etched on her features. As he climbed the grand staircase to their bedroom, he felt as though each step carried him closer to a decision that would reshape his life forever. But fate, as it often does, had other, more dramatic plans in store. Anastasia Pierce had reached her breaking point. The night before, she and Alexander had exchanged tense text messages. His vague reassurances did little to calm her growing apprehension. A new fear clutched at her heart. What if Alexander never truly intended to leave Catherine? What if all his promises were just a mirage, dangling before her to keep her interested while he juggled a double life? In a moment of reckless determination, Anastasia decided to force Alexander's hand. She dressed in a tailored navy trench coat, stepping out into the drizzly morning air, and hailed a taxi to Westbridge Hills. The journey felt eternal. Nervous energy sparked in her chest as the suburban scenery glided by a realm of manicured lawns and million-dollar estates. So quiet, it was almost unnerving. She clutched her phone, ignoring a series of missed calls from Alexander. Let him worry, she thought grimly. Arriving at the Van Doren mansion, she stepped out onto the gravel driveway, her heels crunching ominously. The mansion loomed before her, a testament to the wealth and power that Alexander commanded. If he truly wanted a life with her, he had to be honest. She squared her shoulders and marched to the front door, ringing the bell with a steely determination. It was Catherine who opened it. The two women locked eyes for a moment. Catherine, heavily pregnant, was taken aback by the visitor's striking beauty and unwavering stare. Recognition dawned on her face. She'd seen that face in the photos. Instantly, her heart pounded like a war drum. Anastasia Pierce, the woman, introduced herself, barely managing the politeness to offer a tight, thin-lipped smile. "I'm here to see Alexander." Catherine inhaled a trembling breath. So this was the woman who had disrupted her life. Anger roiled beneath her outward composure. "Alexander isn't home," Catherine said icily, stepping aside to block any attempt of entry. "Then I'll wait," Anastasia replied, her voice resolute. She took a daring step forward, as if challenging Catherine to stop her. The tension in the foyer was suffocating. Catherine's fists clenched involuntarily. "You have no right to be here," she hissed. "You've already caused enough harm." Anastasia met her gaze, anger flaring in her emerald eyes. "Listen, Catherine," she said, her tone unyielding. "I know this is painful, but I'm not the only one responsible. Alexander led me on. He promised me." Catherine cut her off, voice quavering with a mix of rage and despair. "Promised you what? A life together? A future? And what about my future? Our child's future?" In that moment, both women realized how intricately their fates had become entwined by one man's lies. The confrontation escalated into a chaotic exchange of accusations and heartbreak, culminating in a stark ultimatum from Anastasia: "If Alexander doesn't choose me, I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of man he really is." Before Catherine could respond, headlights swept over the driveway as Alexander's car pulled in. He stepped out, shock painted all over his face at the sight of the two women. His mistress and his wife both pregnant, with questions, accusations, demands stood mere feet apart, and he was the linchpin in this entire, spiraling disaster. Little did Alexander realize the damage was already done, and that destiny had yet another cruel twist waiting around the corner. The wind picked up again as storm clouds gathered above Westbridge Hills, painting the sky a deep grey. Alexander hurried to the front steps, his heart pounding from the moment he recognized Anastasia's sleek figure standing face to face with Catherine. "Alexander," Anastasia said stiffly, hands balled at her sides. Her eyes flicked to Catherine's pregnant belly, then back to him. "We need to talk." "Inside," Catherine added, her voice cold. "Now." Alexander could scarcely breathe under the weight of their combined fury. He led them to the living room, a space usually reserved for elegant gatherings and polite conversation. Today, it felt like the stage for a tragic showdown. The air crackled with tension as they stood in a triangle, Catherine by the grand piano, Anastasia near the fireplace, and Alexander between them, his expression etched with desperation. He turned to Anastasia first. "What are you doing here? This is my home. You can't just—" She cut him off with a raised hand. "Don't you dare scold me. You've been avoiding me, dodging my questions. You promised me a life, a future. I deserve an explanation." Catherine's gaze was laser-focused on Alexander. "So it's true. She came to stake her claim in our home, Alexander." Her voice trembled with unmasked hurt. "Did you even think about what this would do to me? To your child?" Alexander's head swiveled from one to the other, panic shining in his eyes. "Catherine, Anastasia, this got out of control. I never wanted to hurt either of you. Yet here we are." Anastasia fired back. "Stop pretending you're some helpless bystander. You orchestrated this. You promised me a fresh start, and now you're looking at me like I'm a stranger." Silence smothered the room. Catherine found her breath uneven, anxiety pressing down on her like a vise. She spoke slowly, trying to maintain composure. "You told me last night you needed time. Well, time's up. Choose now, Alexander. Tell her to leave and cut ties for good, or we're done." The ultimatum hung in the air, a loaded gun aimed at the fragile life he'd built. Alexander looked at Anastasia, whose jaw was set in defiance. Then he turned to Catherine, her eyes dark with betrayal, one hand protectively resting on her belly. A swirl of images raced through his mind. The vow he'd taken with Catherine, the child that was mere weeks away from coming into the world, the nights of stolen passion with Anastasia, the promises he'd made in whispered hushes. His throat felt dry as desert sand. He paused, swallowed. "I choose Catherine. This is my family. I can't abandon my wife and our baby." Anastasia recoiled as though slapped. "You're making a mistake," she said, voice shaking. "You told me you were unhappy, that you wanted out." Alexander closed his eyes. Maybe I said things in the heat of the moment, but it's over. We're done, Anastasia." Tears welled in Anastasia's eyes. Part of her had expected this answer, but hearing it aloud shattered her illusions. She shot Catherine a look that was equal parts fury and sorrow. "You think you've won?" she said in a voice strangled by heartbreak. "He'll do it again. Men like Alexander never change." With that, she spun on her heel and headed for the door, leaving Alexander and Catherine in the hush of aftermath. But even as the door slammed shut, Catherine could not find relief. Instead, a deep, unsettling dread settled in her chest. Something in Anastasia's parting words, in her aura of steely resolve, warned that this was far from over. In the days that followed, Alexander tried to make amends, but Catherine's trust had been severely eroded. She went through the motions, allowing him to accompany her to doctor appointments, letting him place a comforting hand on her shoulder, but he could sense the emotional chasm that now divided them. The staff at the mansion tried to maintain a veneer of normalcy, but whispers circulated. Servants exchanged nervous glances. The air felt fraught with unspoken truths and dangerous secrets. For Alexander, guilt was a relentless spectre. He took extended leaves from his work, passing off responsibilities to his junior partners so he could focus on repairing his marriage. But whenever Catherine caught him texting on his phone, her face would darken, consumed by the bitter memory of his betrayal. Sensing her suspicion, Alexander tried to distance himself from anything that might link him back to Anastasia. He blocked her number, deleted their photos, and tried to bury every trace of her existence. But forgetting is often easier said than done. Meanwhile, Anastasia seethed in her small condo across town, nursing the wounds of rejection. She ruminated over every promise Alexander had made, every glance, every caress. Had it all been a lie? Or had Catherine's pregnancy forced him into a corner he couldn't escape? Yet she refused to accept that her relationship with Alexander was truly finished. She told herself that men like him rarely stayed in the straight and narrow for long. All she needed was a moment, a single slip-up, to wedge herself back into his life, or at least to exact some measure of revenge for the heartbreak. On a particularly sleepless night, she scrolled through her phone, pausing at a saved voicemail from Alexander, left weeks ago. His voice was low, seductive, sweet as honey. "You're my shining star, Anna. I can't wait to build the life we've been dreaming about." She replayed it several times, tears of rage blurring her vision. Finally, with trembling fingers, she forwarded the voicemail to Catherine's email address, found on the Van Doren Foundation's official website. No note, no explanation, just raw evidence of Alexander's duplicity. Let Catherine decide how to interpret it. When Catherine woke the next morning, she found the voicemail in her inbox. Listening to it felt like ripping open barely healed wounds. She stared at her phone in disbelief, the numbness giving way to anger. Alexander was still asleep beside her, oblivious to her discovery. She wanted to wake him, to scream, to demand why he had ever said those words. But she fought the urge. Instead, she slipped out of bed and walked to the nursery. The pastel walls, the mobile gently spinning over the crib, all reminded her of what was at stake, her baby's future. Sighing, she sank into the rocking chair, the phone screen casting a pale glow in the dim morning light. She was tired physically, emotionally, spiritually, tired of feeling powerless. A plan began to form in her mind. If Alexander had indeed ended things, then Anastasia's meddling might be an act of desperation. But if he was lying, Catherine intended to find out. No more half measures. She was determined to lay this entire mess bare, consequences be damned. A new storm system rolled over the coast, lightning slicing the sky in eerie flashes. The thunder echoed like a premonition of chaos yet to come. Catherine decided she couldn't wait any longer. She approached Alexander in his study, face solemn, heart pounding. "We need to talk," she said, her voice devoid of the softness he once loved. The man across from her looked fatigued, but she showed little sympathy. He nodded, shutting his laptop. "What is it, Kath?" She held up her phone, her gaze cold. "Anastasia forwarded me a voicemail. From you." Alexander's face tightened, a flicker of panic in his eyes. "Catherine, that's old. Before I decided to fix things with you, I swear. Then why is she sending it now?" Catherine demanded, forcing her rising anger down. "Are you still in contact?" "No," he said firmly. "I told you. I ended it. She won't leave me alone. She's upset." Catherine wanted to believe him, but trust had become a fragile concept in her life. "I'm giving you one chance to prove you're telling the truth," she said. "Meet with Anastasia face to face. Make it clear, once and for all, that she has no place in our lives. That might be the only way she'll stop harassing us." Alexander swallowed hard. He imagined Anastasia's pleading eyes, the swirl of unspoken sorrow between them. But Catherine was right. There was no other way to end this cleanly. "Fine," he said, his voice tinged with resignation. "I'll do it. On one condition, you come with me. Let there be no confusion." Catherine paused. The idea of confronting her husband's mistress again filled her with dread, but perhaps this was the closure they needed. "All right," she agreed quietly. "We'll do it together." That evening, a meeting was arranged at a neutral location, a private lounge in a boutique hotel. Downtown, quiet enough for discreet conversation. Rain hammered against the windows as the trio converged. Anastasia arrived first, nursing a glass of wine at a corner table. Catherine and Alexander appeared moments later, side by side but maintaining a formal distance. Alexander wasted no time. "Anna," he said tightly, "this needs to end. We're done. I'm choosing my family." Anastasia's eyes flickered with wounded pride. She made a visible effort to remain composed, though her voice quivered. "Are you sure, Alex? After everything we shared?" Catherine stiffened, her arms crossed. "He's sure," she cut in, refusing to be intimidated. "We both are." The lounge was nearly empty, their voices resonating with a tense intimacy. Anastasia inhaled sharply, as if grappling with her next words. "Fine," she said, forcing a shrug. "But I didn't come here to beg. I came to warn you. If you think I'm going to disappear quietly, you're mistaken." Lightning illuminated the windows, revealing streaks of rain that smeared the night sky. Catherine's heart hammered. "What are you talking about?" Anastasia leaned forward, her green eyes narrowing. "Alexander promised me more than just sweet words. He made business deals in my name, gave me insider information. It's all documented, Catherine. I could ruin him or your precious Van Doren name if I wanted to. Alexander paled. Anna, you wouldn't, he whispered, realizing the depth of the betrayal he'd enabled. A bitter smile tugged at Anastasia's lips. Don't corner a wounded animal, darling. You never know how vicious it might become. The flash of lightning outside was blinding, followed by a crack of thunder so loud it rattled the chandelier overhead. In that moment, all pretense of civility shattered, and Catherine realized that the storms raging within their lives were far from over. The next morning brought a jarring sense of urgency. Catherine woke early, anxiety dancing across her heart. She paced the corridors of the Van Doren mansion, imagining the headlines if Anastasia unleashed her secrets. Alexander's shady dealings might become a public spectacle, and their child would be born into a maelstrom of scandal. She recalled every charity event, every press conference, every philanthropic project that bore the Van Doren name. Reputations could be destroyed in a single headline, but her concerns went beyond image. She feared for Alexander's mental state. Though she resented him for his betrayal, she also recognized that his world had been built on high stakes and risk-taking. If everything came crashing down, would he survive the fall? Meanwhile, Alexander was consumed with damage control. He made frantic calls to his attorneys, his business associates, even calling in favors from local politicians. All the while, he refused to look Catherine in the eye, as if the shame of his affair and the fear of public ruin were more than he could bear. Just when Catherine thought she'd seen the worst, a stern knock sounded at the mansion's front door. A courier arrived with a sealed envelope addressed to Alexander. Inside, they found copies of files implicating him in insider trading and shady property acquisitions documents that bore Anastasia's name in key places. A handwritten note in flamboyant cursive was included. Decide how this ends, AP. Alexander sank into a leather armchair, burying his face in his hands. She's not bluffing, he whispered, voice trembling. I gave her access to some deals. She knows everything. Catherine's mind whirled. She felt a rush of anger, betrayal, and dread. Why, Alex? Why risk everything we've built? He looked up at her, hollow-eyed. Because I thought I was invincible, unstoppable. I got caught up in the thrill of it all. Now it's over. Catherine inhaled sharply, feeling a wave of dizziness. She pressed a hand to her belly, steadying herself. The baby was due any day now, and she realized she needed to protect herself and their child. We can't let her blackmail us, she said resolutely. We have to go to the authorities or fight this head-on, or... The conversation was interrupted by her sudden gasp. A sharp pain rippled through her abdomen, and she doubled over. Alexander rushed to her side, eyes flaring in alarm. What's wrong? My water broke, Catherine managed between labored breaths. It's time. Panic surged through Alexander. Everything else, Anastasia, the documents, the scandal became secondary. He scooped Catherine into his arms, shouting for the driver to bring the car around. Within minutes, they were racing to the hospital. The tension of the mansion left behind, replaced by a new fear that Catherine and the baby might face complications. Yet even as they sped through the rain-slicked streets, one thought pulsed in Catherine's mind. Anastasia's threat still loomed, and nothing, not even the miracle of birth, could fully eclipse the darkness that had infiltrated their lives. She clung to Alexander's hand, uncertain whether this child's birth would bring them together or tear them apart once and for all. The drive to Westbridge Hills Medical Center felt like a fever dream for Catherine. Every bump in the road sent a jolt of pain through her abdomen, and the contractions were coming fast, each wave sharper than the last. Alexander gripped the steering wheel with knuckles turned white, adrenaline coursing through his veins. Their previous worries, Anastasia's blackmail, the precarious business deals, receded in the urgency of impending parenthood. Upon arrival, nurses quickly wheeled Catherine into a private labor suite, and Alexander followed close behind. Alarms beeped softly in the background, the fluorescent lights lending the corridor a harsh brightness that only amplified Catherine's vulnerability. A flurry of medical staff attended her, checking vitals, hooking her up to monitors that tracked the baby's heartbeat. The rhythm was strong, steady, a reassuring sign that even amid this chaos, new life persisted. Alexander hovered at the bedside, stroking Catherine's hair as she breathed through the contractions. Tears shimmered in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered, so quietly that she almost didn't hear. "I'm sorry for everything." Catherine looked into his face, searching for sincerity. Despite the pain, she managed a nod, acknowledging at least the sincerity of the moment, if not full forgiveness just yet. "Let's get through this first," she murmured, her voice tight with discomfort. And so began the longest hours of their lives. Each contraction felt like a crescendo, Catherine's breathing ragged as she tried to focus on the coaching from the obstetrician. Alexander offered her ice chips, whispered encouragement, and rubbed her back. In those moments, the memory of Anastasia and the documents receded, replaced by an all-consuming devotion to bringing their child into the world safely. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the doctor announced it was time for Catherine to push. She summoned every ounce of strength in her body, the pressure building to an almost unbearable peak. Lightning flashed outside the hospital windows, thunder rolling in a dramatic underscore to the miracle and madness of the evening. Alexander held her hand, pressing his forehead against hers, tears running down both their cheeks. One final push, and the room filled with the piercing cry of a newborn. Catherine collapsed back against the pillows, gasping. The world slowed as a nurse carefully wrapped the tiny, squirming infant in a soft blanket, then placed the baby in Catherine's arms. "It's a girl," the nurse announced, smiling warmly. The baby's cries softened as she felt her mother's warmth and her father's trembling hand gently stroking her cheek. In that moment, Catherine and Alexander locked eyes. A silent understanding passed between them, a recognition that, despite the betrayals and lies, they had created something precious. For the first time in months, hope flickered in Catherine's chest, even if it was fragile and overshadowed by the storms awaiting them outside the hospital walls. For a brief time, the world paused. Friends and family, those who hadn't already distanced themselves, sent congratulations. Nurses praised the baby's health. The newborn slept peacefully in a bassinet beside Catherine's bed, and Alexander found himself watching in awe, as if seeing true beauty for the first time. But reality waited, patient and unrelenting. On the second day of Catherine's hospital stay, Alexander stepped out to take a call from his lawyer. It was confirmed. Anastasia had indeed sent copies of incriminating documents to various media outlets, all set to publish unless Alexander met her demands. She wanted a substantial sum of money, enough to set her up for life, and a public apology that admitted no wrongdoing on her part but tarnished his own credibility. Alexander felt the walls closing in. He could pay her off, but it wouldn't end the speculation or the rumors. Worse, it would deplete his liquidity at a critical moment, possibly sabotaging the Charleston development deal. On the other hand, if he refused, he risked being charged with insider trading, an offense that could ruin him financially and legally. His mind reeled as he stared at the sterile hospital corridor, where the faint smell of antiseptic mingled with his own cold sweat. Returning to Catherine's side, he found her resting, the baby swaddled in her arms. He hesitated, torn between burdening her and wanting to share the weight. Guilt gnawed at him. Eventually, he told her everything. Catherine's first reaction was shock, followed swiftly by anger. But as she looked down at her sleeping daughter, a fierce, protective instinct overshadowed all else. We can't let her destroy this family, she said firmly. You need to fight back, but do it the right way. Alexander nodded, tears threatening to betray his composure. I don't know how, he admitted. The law is on her side if she has proof. Catherine set her jaw. Then we need to find proof that she manipulated you too. Something that shows she isn't an innocent victim. Doesn't she have any skeletons in her closet? A spark of possibility flickered in Alexander's eyes. Anastasia had once boasted about bending rules in her art curation business, forging documents to smuggle rare artifacts. Could that be leveraged? He wasn't sure. Still, the notion of exposing Anastasia's wrongdoing carried its own risks and moral dilemmas. Desperate times call for desperate measures. Alexander reached out to an old acquaintance, Daniel Remington, a tech-savvy investor who owed him a favor from their early days in real estate. Daniel was known for keeping hush-hush about grey area tasks, often skirting legal lines to get what he needed. Alexander felt a wave of distaste for resorting to such alliances, but the alternative was ruin. They met in a dimly lit parking garage beneath a high-rise downtown, reminiscent of a scene from a spy thriller. Rain dripped from overhead pipes, creating puddles that reflected the fluorescent glow of flickering lights. You've really stepped in it this time, haven't you, Van Doren? Daniel said, leaning against a concrete pillar, arms folded. Alexander exhaled heavily. I need to protect my family, Dan. I messed up. Help me fix it. With a wry smile, Daniel nodded. I'll do what I can. Get me her phone number, any email addresses, social media handles, anything. I'll see if there's something we can use to negotiate. Alexander handed over a small piece of paper with Anastasia's details. Whatever you find, keep it quiet. I don't want to push her into a corner so badly that she lashes out. She's capable of anything right now. Daniel's eyes gleamed, understood. Back at the mansion, Catherine sat in the nursery, feeding their daughter, whom they had named Elizabeth Grace Van Doren. The baby was a marvel, a tiny bundle of innocence and potential. Every coo and yawn tugged at Catherine's heart, reminding her of the life she wanted to protect, a life free from the shadow of scandal and betrayal. Alexander paced the hallway, phone in hand, awaiting Daniel's call. Eventually, it came. Daniel's voice crackled through the line. I've found something. Anastasia had some questionable dealings with a private collector overseas. There might be grounds for accusing her of fraud or smuggling. The details are fuzzy, but the mere threat of exposing this might make her back off. Relief coursed through Alexander, though it was tainted by the bitterness of how low he was willing to sink. All right, draft a statement. Send it to her. Make it clear that if she releases anything about me, I'll release what you found about her. Let's see if she calls our bluff. An uneasy truce settled over the Van Doren household as they waited for Anastasia's response. Days dragged on without any new media reports or blackmail messages. Catherine clung to hope, her focus shifting to Elizabeth's well-being. She began to imagine a future, maybe a smaller house, a calmer life. She'd even considered renting an apartment somewhere far away if the scandal erupted, determined to shield Elizabeth from the fallout. One afternoon, Catherine was in the living room, rocking Elizabeth in her arms while Alexander scrolled nervously through emails. Suddenly his phone buzzed. A message from Anastasia flashed across the screen. You think you've outsmarted me? I'm not giving up that easily. Let's negotiate. Alexander glanced at Catherine. She nodded, silently urging him to handle the situation carefully. Responding promptly, Alexander typed, We both have damaging information. Let's end this without mutual destruction. What do you want? A minute passed, felt like an eternity before Anastasia's next message arrived. A sum of money. Enough to cover damages and lost opportunities. Once I have it, I disappear. No more threats. Bile rose in Alexander's throat. He typed through gritted teeth, where and when. She shot back a location, a chic cafe in the city, and a time, tomorrow afternoon. Alexander's mind churned. Meeting in public reduced the risk of confrontation, but it also meant there'd be watchful eyes. He'd have to be cautious. Catherine insisted on coming along, but Alexander shook his head. We can't risk that. If we push her too hard, she might become vindictive again. Reluctantly, Catherine agreed, but she insisted on a safeguard. Alexander would wear a small recording device, courtesy of Daniel's connections, to capture any incriminating admissions. If Anastasia tried to renege or twist the agreement, they'd have tangible evidence to protect themselves. The next day arrived, overcast and drizzling. Alexander parked a few blocks from the cafe, briefcase in hand. Inside the case was a fraction of the money Anastasia demanded, with a promise of the rest to be wired to an account once she confirmed the destruction of all incriminating documents. Daniel lurked in a nearby car, ready to call the police if things went sideways. Alexander's heart hammered as he stepped inside. Anastasia was seated in a corner booth, wearing large sunglasses despite the grey day. She signaled him over, her smile a precarious blend of regret and defiance. "Busy day?" she asked, voice dripping with irony. Alexander ignored the small talk and placed the briefcase on the table. "Here's your partial payment. You'll get the rest when I have proof you've deleted every file and retracted every statement." Anastasia removed her sunglasses, revealing reddened eyes that hinted at sleepless nights. "You really believe I wanted it to come to this, Alexander? I loved you." A pang of something, guilt, pity, flickered across his face. "We both made mistakes, but you went too far, Anna. Blackmail isn't love." She sighed, tears threatening but never quite falling. "I just wanted the life you promised. Everything else was me lashing out." He slid a small flash drive across the table. "This contains evidence of your dealings abroad. Let this serve as a reminder not to cross me again." Her gaze hardened, and for a moment Alexander wondered if she might cause a scene. Instead, she took the flash drive, exhaling sharply. "Fine, I'll wipe the files, retract my leaks. But if you ever breathe a word about my dealings, I'll have my own backup plan. Do we understand each other?" Alexander nodded. The tension between them was suffocating, heavy with the ghosts of what might have been. With trembling hands, Anastasia unzipped the briefcase, checking the cash. Then she stood up, smoothing her coat. "You win, Alex. But trust me, life doesn't always hand out second chances. Whatever problems you had in your marriage, fix them, or you'll end up right back here." She brushed past him, leaving a faint trace of perfume in her wake. Outside, the drizzle had intensified into a steady rain. Alexander watched her disappear into the grey cityscape, a swirl of emotions too tangled to name. Part of him felt relief, another part sadness, and yet another part an unshakable sense of foreboding. Had he truly shut the door on this chapter, or had he merely postponed a worse disaster? Back in Westbridge Hills, Catherine waited anxiously by the fireplace, Elizabeth asleep in her nursery. When Alexander finally returned, drenched from the rain, she saw the exhaustion etched in every line on his face. Without speaking, he sank onto the sofa beside her. The crackling fire cast flickering shadows on the walls, as if echoing the turbulent shadows that still haunted them. "It's done," he said quietly. "She'll back off." Catherine searched his face for reassurance. "And the evidence? She'll destroy it?" He nodded, though not entirely convincingly. "That's what she agreed to." Reaching out, he took her hand, his voice trembling slightly. "Catherine, I know I've hurt you deeply. I know sorry doesn't fix everything, but I want to try, for Elizabeth, for us. I promise you, I'm finished with lies." She studied him for a long moment, her eyes reflecting both the pain of betrayal and the flicker of renewed hope. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady. "Then we'll try. We'll go to therapy. rebuild trust one day at a time. But I won't ever go back to how things were, Alexander. Our daughter deserves better than that. He nodded fervently. She does. We all do. In the weeks that followed, life took on a new texture, cautious, subdued, but not without glimmers of promise. The public scandal never materialized. The media moved on to the next sensation, and Alexander's lawyers quietly settled any lingering legal concerns behind closed doors. The Charleston deal pulled through, albeit at a tighter margin, and Alexander scaled back his ambitions. Realizing he could no longer juggle illusions and deception with the role of husband and father, Catherine found solace in motherhood, bonding with Elizabeth in the nursery she had lovingly designed. She began writing poetry again, using her pen as a means to process the swirl of emotions. Piece by piece, the Van Doren mansion shifted from a battleground of secrets into a haven where forgiveness might just take root. They often reflected on the darkest hours, the forgotten birthday that set everything in motion, the confrontation with Anastasia at the mansion, the heartbreak that almost tore them apart. Yet through sheer tenacity and a baby's gentle laughter, they found the resolve to keep moving forward. A fragile peace had settled over their lives, but they knew it would take endless care to maintain. For Catherine, each dawn was a chance to decide anew whether to trust Alexander, to trust herself, and to trust in the future of their family. For Alexander, every kiss he placed on Elizabeth's forehead reminded him of the responsibility he bore, the vow he'd nearly broken beyond repair. "Let's make this work," Catherine would say, gazing at their daughter curled in her crib. "Yes," Alexander would echo, voice hushed with humility. "Let's make it work." And in that quiet promise, day by day, they chose each other, determined to cling to the precious gift of life that bound them together even after almost losing it all. And so ends the turbulent tale of Alexander and Catherine Van Doren, a cautionary reminder that even the wealthy cannot buy freedom from the consequences of betrayal. In the wake of heartbreak and near disaster, they stand at a crossroads where forgiveness is an everyday choice, and trust is rebuilt brick by painstaking brick. Anastasia's legacy haunts them still, a reminder of how quickly desire and deceit can unravel a life of apparent perfection. Yet in the fragile laughter of a newborn baby, Alexander and Catherine have found a reason to hope, a testament to the power of second chances. If you've been riveted by this real-life drama, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more stories that peel back the layers of human desire, ambition, and redemption. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe a marriage can truly be saved after such betrayal? Let's keep the conversation going.